Globalization, technology and capitalism have marched way too recklessly, leaving many people around the world poorer, unemployed and insecure. The educated middle class, who hitherto fought against vested interests, have become part of the elite. The rise of right-wing nationalist leaders like Donald Trump is the common man's way of showing his anger against elites and liberals. Populist leaders like Trump and even India's RSS direct this anger wrongfully against minorities and immigrants. So how does one preserve the benefits of free markets and globalization and yet provide a sense of security to those threatened with job losses, like the US factory worker and the Indian farmer? That's the theme of Raghuram Rajan's new book, The Third Pillar. The former RBI Governor and Professor of Finance at Chicago Booth School wants the state and markets to give more space to local communities. This book is obviously interesting because it comes ahead of a contentious general election in India. To give us more insights into the book, I have with me the man himself, Professor Raghuram Rajan. Dr. Rajan, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. Well, first up, this rise of populist nationalism, as you say, people like Trump and Erdogan, do you think this is a passing phase, or do you think this can last, this populist nationalism, for several decades?
I don't think it's a passing trend. I think what we have to worry about is that it creates forces that essentially are beyond those of its leaders and eventually can become very destructive, especially because populist nationalism often looks for enemies, both internal and external, to survive. And so my sense is that what we have to be very wary of is this trend of populist nationalism leading to something much worse, conflict between countries, for example. And that could set back the world significantly at a time when, in fact, we need global solutions to many of the problems we have, such as climate change, as well as aging populations in the West. So in that sense, the consequences of populist nationalism that we will come to rue at some point could be long-lasting. That is why I say we have to be very wary, even if the fascination with populist nationalism lasts only for a while. The consequences could be quite detrimental. Okay.
I will come to the global problems in just a minute, since you talk about reordering and reorganizing of institutions like the IMF. But first, let me come closer home to India. Here as well, we have seen the rise of Hindu nationalism as an answer, because a prior period of elitist answers have only created or have created a lot of crony capitalism. Do you think that this is a very big threat in India, the rise of Hindu nationalism? Or do you think that even this will be checked by the country's pluralism?
Well, I think India has many strengths. And one of the strengths that I allude to in the book is its democracy, that India's democracy often comes up with the right answers. So we have an election coming in the next few months. And the message that the wider population wants to send will, in fact, be seen in that election. I mean, India is a varied country with a very diverse population. We have maybe the second largest Muslim population in the world. We're competing with Pakistan on that. And we have many other religions represented, many ethnic groups. To some extent, we need a real civic sense of nationalism, that we're all Indians and we all are Indians because we have a common set of values. And anything that subverts that, I think, becomes problematic on whichever side. And to that extent, I think we need to think about what kind of India we want going forward, and that will stand us in good stead.
Okay. When you were speaking about populist nationalism and whether it's a passing trend, you said that it might harm institutions even if it stays only for a short time. I expected in your book that you will discuss about the central bank, because both in the United States and in India, there have been attacks on the central bank. Do you worry about that institution in particular?
Well, I would take it more broadly. I think that a whole variety of quote-unquote elite institutions are under attack in a variety of countries. And I think some of this is because we took for granted that there was broad popular support for the institutionalization of various policies. And of course, when a large fraction of the population feels left out, when they elect their champions back into power, those champions essentially take it upon themselves to attack the elite. I mean, in India, it goes to the point of attacking the Loitan's Delhi, as it's sometimes called. In the US, it is about attacking the elite in Washington or New York. And what we don't often capture as much is that some of these institutions have tremendous value in protecting a government from its worser instincts. And to that extent, these institutions have come up over time. They have a purpose. What the populist movement is questioning is the importance of these institutions and what they do, and also somewhat mistakenly saying that the will of the people should override these institutions. Well, the will of the people created these institutions in the first place to protect the state and the nation from the worser instincts of the will of the people, which sometimes exhibits itself. And so to that extent, these institutions need to once again build clarity of why they are, what their purpose is, and why what they do is in the best interests of the nation. This means they can't sort of hide in a corner. They have to keep coming out and explaining what they do, and that's a dangerous process because you're competing with a politician on the same stage, and politicians don't like that.
Okay, I can see a personal angle over there. But, exactly, I want to pin you down to the central bank because we have seen, people trying to grab the central bank's capital. And, of course, even a governor has resigned because of clashes with the government. More specifically, do you think that an institution like the central bank in India can be in danger? I mean, we repeatedly hear statements like no institution is above the country. So do you think...
Look, I think that statement is right, but also wrong in intent. The statement is right that no institution is above the country. At the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that the elected representatives of the people at all times have absolute power and domain over every institution in the country. This is the whole idea of checks and balances, that institutions act as checks and balances over the unbridled power of the representatives of the people. This is, in a sense, the essential nature of our country itself. Through various Supreme Court rulings, this has been established. So I think that some of the people making these statements don't quite understand what a constitutional democracy is about.
You are not still answering my question. Are you worried about the independence of the Reserve Bank of India?
I don't, in the longer context, no, I don't think so. I think that the Reserve Bank has plenty of good qualities, and whatever government is in power will recognize that it needs a strong Reserve Bank. So longer term, no, I think we have ups and downs.
Okay. You've written in detail about, you have a whole chapter on the problems with the Indian state, markets and polity. You say over there that rather than India get into many things like owning banks and airlines, it should do cleaner things like clean property records and improve education. But, we've seen various governments, we have seen the UPA, we have seen the NDA. Nobody is willing to give up control on banks, as you can see. Do you see any progress there at all in terms of lessening the control of the politician and the polity on banks?
I think we are coming to a point where we really need a second generation of reforms. The reforms that were carried out by Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Narasimha Rao in the early 1990s were big reforms. We're coming to the end of the benefits from those reforms. Not yet, but soon. And so it seems to me we need another generation of reforms. And these reforms should take into account our specific abilities. One of the problems we have is a government with limited capacity. Now, this may sound astounding to many listeners. We have a government which has, a lot of power. Which is often, there are few checks on some of that power. For example, the power to give advertisements to the press. But we also don't have a government with great capabilities to do what it needs to do very effectively. And so in that sense, if you count the number of government officials, for example, as a size of population, we're not that large relative to other countries, and certainly in government spending, we're far below some of the industrial countries or even Brazil. So in that sense, I think it's time we took a close look at what government does and see how we can focus it on precisely what the country needs, enlisting the power of the people to essentially take economic growth forward. We are too dependent. The government tries to do too many things. We become too dependent on the government, which also creates the possibility for a more authoritarian government. And to change the structure of the economy, I think we need a whole new set of reforms. These would focus on creating a much more enabling structure so that people, private business can flourish, workers can flourish in a whole new set of jobs being a very important requirement of the economy, but that it's not the government leading the way, but the government creating the possibility for people to do it. And that's why focusing on things like how do we improve the process of land acquisition so that it's both fair but also rapid, so that we can unleash construction, which would be a very big boon to the country, both in jobs, but also in the activity that would foster both in manufacturing as well in services. So we need to think about an enabling government rather than a government which tries to do a lot of things, many of them very poorly.
Oh, yes, you have spoken about how construction helped employment in China, and that should be one sector India could concentrate on. But really, if you got a shot at being finance minister or policy maker, what would your top 3 policies be?
Well, I think there are short-term issues. A number of economists, of which I was one, have put together a set of policy ideas, and they're out there for anybody to read. They're coming out in a book. But let me say very quickly that certainly I would focus on short-term actions that could put a lot of projects back on track that are still stuck, clean up the banks as quickly as possible and set them back on credit growth, some of which is happening. And third, try and find 2 or 3 key reforms which could unleash growth. Certainly one of them has to be how do we revive agriculture in a way that reduces distress. A second would be this issue of land acquisition. Can we learn from the best practices of the states and find methods that seem really fair, and in a sense also give states freedom to pick the method that works best for them so that we learn from each other's experiments, land acquisition, bank cleanup, as well as trying to find some key policies that would revive agriculture. These would be top priorities. Okay,
well, to repeat a question I've asked you before, have you been approached by any of the parties to take up a policy-making position if they were to win?
No, I think it's really premature to have these discussions. I really think that this is an important election for India, and I also think we need a new set of reforms. I'd be happy to push those, ideas, and in fact, we are trying to do that more broadly to anybody who listens.
Dr. Rajan, now let me come to what the dangers you say are, besetting global trade itself. You have spoken about how we have to reimagine the IMF, give more powers to China in particular, and even to countries like India. Do you think it is feasible at all, say in the near future, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years?
So one of the things I always complain about is that we look at the present and we feel so disheartened by the present. We think there's no way out. And to some extent, the book is an attempt to imagine the future and say, what are the things that we will need to do in order to get to a better place? Now, you first need imagination. What is the future that you are thinking about that you think could work better? Then, as people see that, the political forces start getting together and do what is necessary. My old report on the financial sector in the 2008 with a very eminent committee, we've implemented much of that. But at the time we brought it out, most people said, this is not going to fly. This is a bunch of pie-in-the-sky ideas. What do you mean? You're going to free up branching for banks in India? We've never allowed that. And we've seen branching freed up. So, things can happen. The broader point is that the world as created by the United States, the economic world as created by the United States post-World War II, is reaching the end of its shelf life. There are a number of economies which are large now that weren't large then. China, of course, India soon, the European Union itself is an agglomeration that didn't exist then. And in this multipolar world, the idea that one hegemon would continue to determine a lot of what goes on simply doesn't hold. We need to bring everybody into the tent, but in a way that the rules meet the needs of all these players. At the same time, I also do argue in the book that we've gotten too far on globalization. Too many rules, yes. Too many constraints are now discussed and implemented at the global level, thus subverting the whole democratic process. And it can't be that, a lot of things are agreed in a closed room, either in Basel or Geneva or Paris, and then the country's leaders come back to implement them in the country without ever asking, should we actually do this? So that's the sense in which I think it's time that not only do we change the global structures in a way as to make it more democratic and more representative of the nature of the globe today, but at the same time, many more decisions should be first taken at the local or the national level, and only then should we have agreement at the global level. Otherwise, we have this frustration which demonstrates itself in the nationalism that you see in Europe, but also in some ways in India.
Okay. Well, you've spoken about universal basic income, and you've basically said that it's not something which even the United States can afford. But in India, we've embarked on this competitive income transfers. This is going to be a recurring expenditure year after year. Would you worry that India is also getting into fiscal profligacy, unaffordable fiscal profligacy?
Well, I do think that we need a fiscal commission which essentially maps out what the obligations are, including contingent liabilities of the government, and gives us a clean picture of what our fiscal position is. We are getting murkier and murkier on our budgetary processes, both at the central and the state level. And politicians may say, why fix what ain't broke? The problem is when that reaction comes, it comes suddenly, and it can be quite devastating. So we have to be very careful that the capital markets don't back up on us someday. And part of this clearer picture is what can we afford in terms of transfers? Because once you declare an entitlement, whether it's health insurance, whether it is a income support for certain categories of people or farmers, these, as you said, are recurring and may in fact grow over time if that category grows and its needs grow. So we are building up contingent liabilities at a fast pace. One of the points in the book was to say entitlements, once set in place, come back to haunt you 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And so it is imperative for India at this point to be very clear about what the cost of these entitlements is. It doesn't fly to say this is going to cost us 10,000 crores this year. What about 5 years from now when it's fully rolled out? How much is it going to cost? Look, targeted income for the very poor is something we can probably afford, but we need to think about how we target it effectively with minimal leakages and wind other systems of support into it. All these are very big changes because there's always resistance to moving other sort of transfers into this targeted income transfer to the very poor. It has to be the very poor because we can't really make significant transfers to a large part of the population. And we also have to think about the broader sort of supports to agriculture that we give, make it much more effective, but that's a separate issue. And when we put all this together, we have to see how much can we afford. And as a country, that's something that is really very important at this point when there's a lot of fiscal obfuscation.
Okay, well, I believe we have less than 2 minutes, so very quickly, one way to be able to afford is if the country grows, if the economy grows. What's your sense? Right now, some rating agency has marked down India's FY20 growth rate to below 7%, to 6.8. What's your own sense of the current India growth story over the next couple of years?
Look, I'm in the camp that I have no idea what the statistics are at this point. We've moved them up, down, we've changed them. I think what we need is a revamp to really figure out, what our true growth rate is. Certainly, I know one minister has said, how can we be growing at 7% and not have jobs? Well, one possibility is we're not growing at 7%. But really, I think the kind of demand coming from out there that seems to, at least at this point, anecdotal, but we'll know from the elections, is that we need economic growth that reaches us. That we need stronger sort of broad-based growth, which primarily for most people means good jobs. Okay. And what we need to do is focus on that. How do we create good jobs for the vast number of people who are leaving schools, who are leaving agriculture, who are leaving universities, in such a way that they can expand India's growth. A lot of people have said the population dividend should not become a population curse. This is the time when we need to make sure that that, in fact, doesn't happen.
Okay. If I can get a one-line answer from you, are you worried about the Indian statistical organization and the data put out?
Look, I'm not worried. I just think we need now to essentially clean up, find out what in fact is the source of confusion with the new GDP numbers, with the revisions, etc. And I would say setting up an impartial body to look at it is an important step to restoring confidence. And it may well be that that body pronounces do thus and such to rebuild confidence. But we absolutely need better confidence in our GDP numbers now, given the back and forth that we've had.
No, actually the bigger problem is that one unemployment report has been kept under the wraps, and that is why the fear that truth is not being revealed. The worry that it is getting politicized, the statistical infrastructure.
Yeah, sorry. I meant something broader than just the GDP number. The whole statistical apparatus, we need sort of some outside impartial views to give us a sense of, are we doing the right thing and have the right procedures been followed? This is an area where India has tremendous strength, tremendous respect in the past. And I think recent events, for whatever reason, have sort of muddied the waters. I think we need to reestablish confidence because certainly navigating without good numbers is really navigating in the dark.
Okay. Raghuram Rajan, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us.